Hi everyone. So for those of you who don't already know, this presentation is about cystic fibrosis and how to properly assess a case study for someone with cystic fibrosis looking to exercise more frequently. So just to give you some details about the presentation, I'll walk you through some background information about cystic fibrosis, epidemiology of cystic fibrosis, pathophysiology, some medication use for people who are diagnosed with CF, and then I'll go into our case study and how to exercise test someone with cystic fibrosis, write a prescription, any special considerations, and then at the end, any conclusions about cystic fibrosis in general and for people who are looking to exercise test and prescribe someone with cystic fibrosis for exercise. So here's some background information about cystic fibrosis for those of you who might not already be familiar with the disease. So CF is a life-threatening genetic disorder. It's actually a recessive gene that is a mutation, but we'll talk about that more later in the presentation. But it does affect the respiratory, digestive, and reproductive systems through excessive mucus production. So usually CF is thought of as just a respiratory disease, but actually the mucus that is produced through the disease affects a lot of other body organs as well. But because a lot of the side effects from CF are more visible because of the respiratory system, like coughing and lung infections, wheezing, shortness of breath, things like that, people often think of it as just a lung disease, though it does affect other body organs because of the mucus clogging airways and trapping bacteria, which can lead to infections. For example, in the pancreas, another organ separate from just the lungs that it affects, the mucus buildup in the pancreas does prevent the digestive enzymes from being able to allow the body to break down food and absorb the vital nutrients from the food that we eat. So just more background information as to what body systems CF does affect. Okay, so now moving into our specific case study. I know this seems like it's jumping ahead a little bit, but I do want to give you some information about the case study for our patient with CF. That way that you can keep this in the back of your mind while we're going through the other points for CF, and you can kind of think about the specific case for when we get to the exercise prescription portion of the presentation. So for our case study, we have a female who's 23 years old and Caucasian. She has been diagnosed with CF since she was 9 years old, and she does have some background with team sports and physical activity. Even though now she's in college, she works out on her own. She did play soccer and gymnastics when she was younger. The only thing that I do want to bring up is that there are difficulties for consistent exercise for a lot of people with CF. Specifically in our case study, so though she does have background in these sports and now works out on her own, it's never really that consistent. Running is very good for patients with CF. Aside from the exercise benefits of running, the vibrations that's caused from moving around so much is really actually good for dislodging the mucus in their lungs and helping them to cough that up. While it's good for them, it's often a little bit embarrassing because they have to either be in a gym or be on a team sport or running in public and kind of having that difficulty breathing, coughing a lot, maybe wheezing. Sometimes the excessive coughing can actually lead to vomiting, which is never a pleasant experience. So a lot of times, because of all of these difficulties and side effects of having CF and working out, people don't necessarily feel as comfortable doing so, and it leads to a less consistent exercise regimen. Another limitation, I guess, to exercise in people with CF is that their treatments take a really long time throughout their day. So we'll get more into what that would look like when we talk about medication use, but just to give a little bit of foresight into that, most of the CF patients do have multiple treatments in a day, and a treatment can last between 30 minutes and an hour, depending on what type of medication that they're taking. So this can really limit the amount of free time they have for physical activity, and really depends on the day with how they're feeling, how they're reacting to the medication, what their lungs are feeling like, and etc. The last thing I want to mention for this case study is that there is a link at the bottom of this slide if you want to copy the URL and check it out. It's just a short video from YouTube with someone with CF kind of outlining what her day looks like, through her medication, through interactions she has with other people, and kind of the difficulties that arise from that. So if you do want more of a visual and more information about what it looks like to have CF, I would definitely check that out. Just to reiterate some of the difficulties living with CF, aside from the discomfort and the embarrassment of the upper respiratory problems, there are different comorbidities that can occur with people who have CF. Two of the big ones are diabetes and arthritis, so that's definitely something to keep in mind if you're prescribing exercise for someone with CF. They might also have other diseases as well. In the case of our patient for the case study, she does have CF-induced diabetes, which is a separate form of diabetes than type 1 or type 2. It actually, they think it results from the excessive mucus kind of surrounding the pancreas and limiting the amount of insulin that can be released into the body. So for our patient, she does have a pump, which is something to keep in mind for exercise as well. Other difficulties with living with CF can include digestive problems and a lack of self-confidence while working out. So now to get into some of the epidemiology of cystic fibrosis, currently there are more than 30,000 patients in the United States and 70,000 worldwide who are diagnosed with cystic fibrosis. While the earliest clear medical descriptions in the historical textbook dates back to the 1930s, CF did exist prior to this date. It was just more difficult to determine what the difference was between something like bronchitis or a lung infection, pneumonia, because CF does have very similar symptoms to these things. So now today we have much more of an awareness of what CF is, how to diagnose it, and hopefully now through so much research, how to treat it. CF is the most common life-shortening disease that's spread genetically through the Caucasian population, specifically European, North American, and Australian descent. In the past 2 decades, though, there have been increasing diagnoses of CF in Latin America, the Middle East, and India, which is interesting to see whether or not there are more cases there or there's just more of an awareness of CF and how to diagnose it in those areas. 53% of all people with CF are younger than 18 years old. It's almost a 50-50 between under 18 and over 18 years old, and more than 75% of people with CF are diagnosed by the age of 2. So though people are being diagnosed at earlier ages, there is kind of a 50-50 spread throughout all different lifespans for people with CF. Another interesting thing about cystic fibrosis is that the estimated cost to treat cystic fibrosis in the United States is more than $900 million a year, which based on the number of patients we have makes the cost per patient almost $40,000 a year, which is extremely high. So again, that's something to keep in mind if you're going to be working with CF patients, is that there's a lot of stress, not only medically and physically on the body, psychologically, but also there's a lot of stress with how bills are going to be paid, the cost for the medication, and therefore they might be less willing to pay for the cost at an exercise facility. So keeping costs low for families with CF is extremely important. For the pathophysiology of cystic fibrosis, it is transmitted through a mutation in a gene called CFTR. So what happens is, since CF is an autosomal recessive disorder, the mutations on the gene are inherited from one allele from both parents in order to be present in the child and to display symptoms of cystic fibrosis. Currently, there are over 1,000 different types of CFTR mutations, which means that it's really difficult to find a cure for the disease because there are so many variants of the mutation, which also means that people display CF in many different ways with many different types of comorbidities and difficulties living with CF. So not every case is exactly the same. There are many different types of mutations, which really complicates this disease. More information kind of about how the abnormality of CFTR can eventually lead to respiratory failure and the way that that works within the body is shown in the chart below, so take a look at that. And again, there are so many different unique variations of the genes, which means that the diagnoses are all different, but the average age for diagnosis is 6 months old, with one or more symptoms in respiratory, gastrointestinal, sinus, and sweat gland systems. So in order to be diagnosed, you're displaying some of those symptoms in some of those body systems, one or more. The theme for all of these body systems is that there's a difference in protein function or an altered cellular abnormality of iron transport. So whether that occurs in the lungs or in the pancreas, the theme in general is that the ion transport is abnormal in order and inhibits the proper function of the epithelial structures. So for medication use, this is going to vary a lot between different patients, but in general, inhaled treatments can be given through an aerosol solution, which is a mist made from liquid medications to reach deep into the airways. So the medicines can go into a cup, which is also called a nebulizer, and it's attached to a small air compressor, which allows the medication to go deeply into the lungs and expand throughout the body system. So the compressor blows the air through the cup to make a mist, and then the people with CF can inhale the mist through a mouthpiece or a mask, which usually takes several minutes for the medication to disperse. Again, there's all different types of medications that can be used, but recently the FDA has approved a new treatment for CF as of last summer, but it only treats certain types of CF patients. Again, like I had mentioned, there are over 1,000 different types of gene mutations, and this one only treats CF patients who have 2 copies of a specific gene mutation. But it is still exciting to know that there are treatments being found for CF, and hopefully because of the success of this new research, it will help to unlock more treatments for the other gene mutations as well. So now to get more into the case study, this is the breakdown of the risk stratification for our patient. To go through each of the age, the family history, smoking, sedentary lifestyle, obesity, hypertension, dyslipidemia, and diabetes. Again, the only risk necessarily on this list is her CF-induced diabetes. However, because CF is a pulmonary disease, she's automatically a high-risk patient. So she does need to see a doctor before starting exercise, and that's something to keep in mind as an exercise professional to make sure you do get that doctor's approval and you know more about CF and the pulmonary disease before you start exercise testing. So the goal for our patient in the case study is to improve her lung capacity to a point to be able to hold her breath and swim the full length of a pool. Before we start doing that, we will exercise test her. The gold standard is the best thing to use, but unfortunately the equipment for this gold standard is very expensive, and therefore the test is hard to come by. So instead we'll be using a more common field test like the shuttle run. In this case study, that seems like the best thing to use because of her previous fitness level and overall ability to run and participate in a graded exercise test. So because there is increasing speeds throughout the test, the test will only require a set of cones and a CD with the intervals timed out. So for patients with CF, there is a modified version that starts off at a lower speed and increases at lower intervals. So here, as you can see, is a model exercise prescription for our case study patient. It does include all 3 aerobic, anaerobic, and flexibility exercises, despite that her goal only addresses aerobic fitness. This is because even though her goal is very specific, it's important to work all body systems and all levels of fitness. So this prescription was created for a mild to moderate level of cystic fibrosis, which is the case for our patient in the case study as well. Some special considerations for exercise, especially in the realm of dehydration, because patients with CF can lose sodium and chloride more frequently and easily than other people while exercising. It's important to make sure they're staying hydrated, they're getting breaks throughout the day, and if you have ways for them to get electrolytes during their workout, then I would definitely recommend doing so. Lastly, in conclusion, here are just some takeaway messages for CF and exercise with those patients. If taken at their own pace, patients with CF can achieve an improved lung capacity and ultimately a healthier lifestyle. It's important to consult with the person's physician to see what kinds of exercises should be avoided, if any. And vibrations in the body and lungs from exercising can be almost like a treatment for some CF patients. And lastly, here are some references. Thank you for watching.